Thank you everyone again for joining. My name is Lindsay Brewer. I'm a delivery lead at Equal Experts, and I'm going to be your host for today's session. Today's session continues our Client Spotlight series, and we're going to be focusing today on leading organizations through change. We're really excited and very grateful to have Mike Potter, the CTO of Thames Water, presenting this evening. Mike's worked with Equal Experts for a number of years, both as a client and a consultant. And I had the privilege of working with Mike in the public sector and was always impressed by his courageous yet gracious leadership and friendly manner. We did some exciting things together back in those days. Following Mike's talk, there'll be time for questions. So as Mike's talking to us, please put questions into Zoom using the Q&A widget, and then people can vote for questions that they want answered. Right, okay, well, over to you now, Mike.
Thank you, Lindsay. Great to see you again. Firstly, welcome everybody. I'd like to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, I am the CTO at Thames Water. I've done I had a number of different lives like many people. I started as an engineer at ICI and latterly spent periods of time in consultancy, but most recently an extended period in government where I met Lindsay and worked with Equal Experts. For me, coming to Thames Water is almost like coming home because it combines something from all of the parts of my career. I'm absolutely delighted you could join me this evening with so much else to think about, perhaps worry about. Great that we can all come together as practitioners. Sorry we can't be together for obvious reasons, but hopefully we can still have a good discussion today. I'd really like to thank the team at Equal Experts for creating this opportunity, this series of conversations, I think enormously powerful, the ones that I've watched and participated in. Today I'm going to talk about our role as CTOs within our organizations. And the first thing I wanted to say is, this is just one point of view. There are many others. This is really about starting a debate amongst ourselves as practitioners, as anything else. So with that, the question is, well, what is a chief technology officer? So I thought, why not look for a definition online? Went to Wikipedia and all the usual places. I actually hit upon this. This is Gartner's definition of a chief technology officer. Something to do with being responsible for physical and personal technology infrastructure, technology deployment. I was quite struck by this, but perhaps for the reason it somehow didn't seem to reflect the experiences I've had and perhaps many others have had in this industry. But it also didn't feel like it resonated in terms of where are we going with our roles that we're playing. So that in part inspired me to think, what is my role today? But what could our role be as practitioners in our businesses in the future? So what could that look like? The first thing is, we probably are still technology leaders for our business. It kind of clues in the title. So what does that actually mean in practice? So I thought what I'd do is talk a little bit about the way we view technology strategy within Thames. So firstly, kudos and thanks to Joe Stepney and my team who came up with this very elegant and simple concept for describing our technology. Within that, we have 16 domains. They're logical domains to us. We group them in this way. Each of them has a single platform at its core. These platforms are large, complex systems. They often persist for more than 15 years. They're usually, not exclusively, provided by large, established providers. And if you do put them in, they require major enterprise change to implement. Actually, each of these core platforms will have complementary systems which uniquely meet business needs. So those have different characteristics, much shorter lifespans, much simpler to change. We'll talk a bit more about those in a moment. And as you can see, these systems are provided by a mixture of specialists and large providers, but also may have in the mix custom developed systems. So some examples of what we've chosen to adopt within Thames Water are things like for our end use compute, no surprise, we're using Microsoft Unified Communications. For our contract, we've chosen to adopt AWS Connect, which we very much see as a next generation platform for providing omni-channel contact to our customers. For B2B, for servicing our business-to-business customers, we've gone down the route of Salesforce Service Cloud, and for billing, we've chosen SAP C4C. Why did we make the decisions we've made? Well, some of them are systems you've already got, and they're decisions that have been set for you by your predecessors. Sometimes they're actually the logical, realistic only, or even only option in the market that best meets your needs. Sometimes you have flexibility and choice, and you can go out, properly evaluate. Sometimes it's simply what you can afford, whether that's to buy or to change. And it may also be where you've had previous bias or preferences, or perhaps even in some cases, where it's been sold to your execs and you've been gifted the decision. So these technology platforms, the choices you make are informed by many different factors. But one of the things that is true for us is not everything is about buying a platform. We're very clear that where we think it's a source of competitive advantage for us, we're going to custom develop to give us that advantage and hopefully to sustain it. And we're doing that in the space of what we call predictive analytics. This is things like using massive data sets, including those provided by third parties, alongside machine learning tools and intuitive presentation tools to predict blockages so that we can go away and proactively clean them before they turn into incidents, to find leaks faster, to build digital twins of our business that allow us to model different scenarios and better target our overall investments. We see this as so fundamental to our business, but we also don't see a mature offering in the market. We deem it to be a competitive advantage and we're custom developing. As I said, each of these platforms has a set of services that build around them, and together they create, alongside some of our other capabilities, they create the journeys that service our customers and support our field teams. This is a classical contact domain. You've got telephony at the core. That's still an integral part of our business. Customers' behavior is changing, and in supporting that, we're building out richer capabilities around outbound communications and messaging, supporting with intelligent agents and similar. But they're all services that we do them once in a while. So we're mastering our data in the core platform. We're reusing those capabilities over and over again across all of the places we can. And we've loosely coupled those things through the use of modern APIs, so that actually, if we decide those satellite services are superseded by something better that better meets our needs, because they're typically SaaS, because they share data models and APIs, they're actually relatively low cost of change. And typically you'd implement them once and then get the value out of them before you choose to change them. So that's technology, and hopefully that's familiar to many of you. You take very similar approaches, I'm sure, in terms of setting out and laying out technology strategy and direction for the business. But actually, what other roles do we have? And I think the second role that I'm seeing CTOs have is commercial leader. And I'm going to give a point of view here that says I think the days of the systems integrator are over. I think that's reflected in things like IBM's recent announcement to separate its company between old co and new co. I think it served its time in a world of loose coupling, of agile delivery, and technology being the core of every single business. Many of us are choosing to take back control of our technology. We're disintermediating the systems integrators. But in doing so, we're still going to be active consumers of technology, but in different ways. So whose technology we're going to consume? So this is one point of view. I believe that the dominant platforms, that I call them the four dragons of the future, are going to be Microsoft, SAP, AWS, and Salesforce. Others may have a different view, absolutely may see it differently. What about Google? I think they're a bit late, and I don't think they're playing strongly enough in the enterprise space. What about Oracle? I don't think their offerings really work in this modern platform world, but again, I could be wrong. And there may be new and disruptive entrants, or people like Ezra or ServiceNow who may grow into these spaces. But I think these are likely to be the four dominant players. What's the positives of these guys? They are platforms today, rich, comprehensive platforms that can enable our businesses. You can consume them in the new cloud models, cloud services, pay as you go. They're constantly extending and innovating around those services. Sounds great, sounds super exciting. What are the negatives? Well, they've learned a lot of behavior from some of the SIs. They are looking to lock us in. Aren't they always? They are looking to leverage revenues once locked in. So, evolving commercial models so that it isn't just about what you pay for the consumption, it's also the support you need to buy associated with that. And if you're locked in, that's a point of leverage for them. They're also looking to lock out other companies. So, reserving the right to charge for digital workers like robots using their software, is a way of creating barriers around their platforms. So, I don't believe there will be one SI for business in the future. I think there'll be multiple platforms, and I think we'll be the service integrator. And we need to learn how to master those platforms, but also master the commercial behaviors that come with those providers. So one of the things we've looked to develop in Thames is a thing we call a supplier playbook. So recognizing that we're committed to these, we joined a business, Many of us will find we're committed to core platforms that have got 10 to 20-year lifespans. In previous lives, I've found that those long-staying platforms, we've got licensing contracts that last 3 years. So the outcomes of the renewal conversations, the commercial negotiations at the end of that period, they are fundamentally the very definition of predictable surprise. Your costs are going to start escalating. So how do you manage those risks? Or how do you set yourself up for the future? So in Thames, we have a supplier playbook for each of our dragons and for a number of other suppliers. What's the characteristic of a playbook? It's a place we bring all our intelligence together. We have data on our current contracts, our commercials, our financials. We look at our risks within those relationships. For example, that might be the way suppliers seek to influence buying decisions in the business. We do market analysis. We look at supplier behavior, supplier business models. We also have a comprehensive set of negotiating levers. We analyze within each of those, over 25 of these we've identified, which of those can we use and mix and match to get best advantage with these suppliers. And obviously the goals you define within them are depending on what the results are you're trying to seek. It could be you simply want to get contract durations that cover the likely life. You want to encourage price locks within that to mitigate commercial risk. You want benchmark ability to ensure you're paying sensible pricing. It could be you just want a master services agreement that creates flexibility so you can continue to buy as those platforms develop. Or it could be you're just looking to manage the commercial risk to avoid these price locks and escalations that we've traditionally seen. But we're finding these a powerful tool for helping to shape our relationship with them, but not just for today, but over the very long term. So what's the next role? Well, we're increasingly, I feel, becoming change leaders in our organizations as well. And I want to talk about stepping stones of digital transformation. So, the hardest part within digital transformation is often just starting. How do you get started? And some time ago when I was working with the likes of Lindsay and Equal Experts in HMRC, we identified actually there was a fairly clear blueprint, a playbook for how you do this. Identifying opportunities that can be delivered quickly, kind of speed to value, first release in 90 days, utilizing a crisis potentially to galvanize action, working with partners like EU who can scale with you, but also building things that were announceable. The idea that you might choose to do this because you can stand a minister alongside it and have a photo taken, even with digital services. But also within that, using comms and PR to act as a flywheel, to build confidence that you can go again on the next iteration. And when we did this in HMRC, we started by building digital services that met a need that we couldn't meet through telephony. We scaled those very, very quickly, 1, 3, 10, rapidly, because we used the approach that I outlined. But in order to build them, that delivered huge benefits. Actually, we realized we needed a comprehensive API economy within the organization so that we could actually integrate the services we were building into the rest of our organization, the rest of our technology, and really give a seamless experience and move towards more real-time rather than batch processing for customers. And that delivered benefits as well, delivered in a very similar model. And then we thought, well, hang on a sec. Why if we expose these APIs to the existing third-party, dreadful downloadable software products that we offer today? Actually, what we could do was replace those products, which cost us a lot of money to maintain, and that would be preferable. And that was a tactical decision, but again, exploited the capabilities we built already, but also delivered value in its own right. And then came the real breakthrough. Why wouldn't we just do this with everybody? Why wouldn't we ask all businesses to work with us using third-party software? And came up with the concept of called making tax digital. And the idea here was that we could make the market through legislation, but also we could then, building on the APIs and our learning around third-party software, integrating with third-party software, we could actually extend the market and embrace all of our customers working in a very different way. And of course, that built huge confidence in the use of APIs as a way to fundamentally deliver our business more differently, much more differently in government. And that led to confidence to actually start to share those APIs across government and actually doing some work that I call joined-up government. So now today, for example, if you want to become under the EU settlement scheme, if you wish to settle, you go on an app. That app takes a photo of you, scans the biometrics in your passport, positively identifies you, then calls an API back to HMRC to see whether you've paid tax in the last 5 years. And if you have, you're deemed entitled to settle. That same earnings API is being reused to look at people who want to marry and bring people into the country from outside the European Union. It's also prospectively being used to validate, for example, whether people are eligible for to have to pay for their when they go into a pharmacy for a prescription or not. A service that currently costs a lot more for the NHS than it should, because too many people declare they shouldn't pay when actually they should. So you look at it and you go, wow, we got to join that government and we got to a fundamental transformation of HMRC's business model. But we did that through following this pathway of delivering incremental value, building capabilities that reused, but also were reusable, but having real agility in the way that we focused and delivered. And, this actually in its own right represents a transformation pathway, is what I call it. And, nowadays, I think increasingly these transformation pathways are clear. Other organizations have been down them, so you can actually take quite a lot of the learning. There's also some research been done by Bain, take from it what you will, but they believe that traditional transformations succeed less than 50% of the time. But actually, these kind of stepping stone approaches succeed more than 80% of the time. Now, take it with a pinch of salt, but there's clearly something in there. And the other thing that progressively building these transformation pathways through the work that I've been doing, we've actually identified there's a whole series of these pathways you can follow. They often start with a nebulous description. We want to be a data-driven organization. We want to master our data. We want to undertake digital transformation. Actually, there are some proven pathways you can follow. When you follow those pathways, you realize, like tube lines, they start to intersect. And at those intersections, that's when you start to see a shift in business model, potentially shift in culture as you traverse across those pathways. But of course, the great thing about them is you can take the first step or go to the second stop. Each one delivers value. You can stop at any point. If you do traverse all the way along those lines, there is that opportunity to intersect with others and really start to see some quite powerful transformation happen. So that's being a change leader. What's the final role I think we're starting to undertake as a CTO? I think it's about being a business leader. So what do I mean by that? The historical model of technology delivery has been very much about client-servant, almost the order taker and passing that to a systems integrator. So as a service provider, we're managing the technology. We'll always have to provide those services. We may do that in a different way through adoption of things like DevOps and SRE and so forth. But actually, increasingly, we're partnering. We understand how to deliver change in very different ways. We understand how to bring different, more powerful delivery approaches. And increasingly, we're taking out-of-the-box capabilities. We're building quickly. Not all of the focus is on exploiting value. So we're co-creating that change as partners within our organizations. But also, as you've seen with HMRC, the pathways we're building as CTOs and we're following, they lead to business model and culture change. And I'm very enormously proud of the fact that HMRC built the furlough service in around 4 weeks. That was because of the capability and culture that was built within that organization. They absolutely deserved the kudos it received for the work that it did there. But I think back to 3 or 4 years ago when I first proposed making tax digital, I was told this is the IT tail wagging the business door. Nowadays I think we are the business too, and it's okay for us to lead, and so can you too. So in conclusion, the current expectation for a lot of people in CTO roles is often we're seen or we're positioned as the technology leader with the chief technology officer. I think when you bring all these things together as a business technology change and commercial leader, you're no longer the chief technology officer, you're now the chief transformation officer. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Guess any questions?
Great, thanks for that really interesting talk, Mike. We've got a couple of questions in the Q&A widget that came in before the talk. So I'd just like to encourage everyone that's watching to, if they've got further questions, I'd like to ask Mike if you can put them into the Q&A widget, and then we'll work through the questions in the voted order. So the first question we've got is, right, so you said that the hardest part of digital transformation is often just starting. And in your experience, are there any prerequisites that an organization needs to have in place before they even attempt this kind of journey?
I don't think there are any hard and fast ones, but there are things that make it easier. I'll be honest with you, I believe nearly all transformation starts with a crisis. That crisis could be like HMRC, where 2014 couldn't pick up the phone to customers. There was you're waiting an hour. I think at the time, and this is public data, HMRC was receiving 60 million calls a year and only answering 50 million of them. That's a crisis. The crisis came about because there weren't digital services as an alternative. So that gave us the reason to start. But as I outlined in the presentation, starting well is also really important, because you've got to, between committing to start and actually your first delivery, first successful results, there is an inherent confidence deficit. For a lot of people, it's a very different way of working. The belief and mindsets aren't there. You've got to build enough confidence that you can cash that and start to scale beyond it. So that's why I talked about mindful choices. Pick the opportunity that will help with the crisis. Pick something you can deliver quickly. Pick something you can very publicly talk about and celebrate the success of. If you do, we call them announceables. If you can announce those things, and actually what will happen is, and then if you use the flywheel of PR and publicity beyond that, what you do is you get that warm glow of success that when you come along and go, that was great, how about we build another service and another service? People go, yeah, fantastic, scale. But I also made the point, you shouldn't start unless you've got a partner who can scale with you. Because over 18 months in HMRC, we went from one team to 50 product teams. I understand it's now called blitz scaling, but at the time it just felt like the right thing to do. We rode a wave of success that we just kept leveraging to build more and more. And then we found these pathways that kept opening up new possibilities. And, absolutely done the same within Thames Water, where we start with 3 exemplar teams, picked mindfully for the same reasons as I described before. Now we're at 36, and it's only 15 months later. Who would have believed Thames Water could have done something like that? Lots of growing pains, lots that we need to do, but the mindful selection of exemplars was critical. What was the crisis there? I don't think there was a crisis. Actually, what we had there was the other condition for starting, which is strong and committed leadership. We were working under a CTO in John Beaumont, who passionately believed the only way to transform Thames Water was through this model. So you don't necessarily need to have a crisis. You can travel in hope as well, and that hope can come from strong and positive leadership that believes in working differently. It's just that in my experience, the vast majority of these things start there. And I would summarize at the time in HMRC, we regularly used to say, dream big and start small, but mostly just start. We thought we didn't originated it. Then somebody pointed out it was a Simon Sinek tweet from 2012. It doesn't change the fact it's still a powerful mantra. Start small. And the only other piece of advice I would give you is, as people start to believe in you and start to invest in you and the scaling of this digital transformation you're doing, one of the things we did do is we recognized that we would start to need to build out, test and prove some of the ideas we had for future pathways and future opportunities. We quietly put aside 5% of all of our investment cases. We invested in the proof of concepts, trials and pilots that we ultimately could then look to scale. Because at that time, as a public sector organization, they were not comfortable with the idea of spending money on things that might not actually deliver. So we quietly put the money in our back pocket and utilized it. I still believe today is a valid approach. Of course, I wouldn't do that in Thames Water. We actually don't need to. We have a strong history of R&D and innovation and funding that. So it's really about making sure it's targeted onto the right things. So, part of your scaling needs to be thinking about how you're going to fund this, the right partner, but it's really about picking the right things to go with at the beginning. And use the opportunity around that.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. That's a really helpful answer, Mike. Next question to tackle is, how do you run from Philip Stewart? How do you convince a non-agile, non-digital front office to listen to what you've got to say? Apart from showing them this recording, of course.
Well, the most important thing you do in all of this transformation is the comms, the confidence, the success. You do that through powerful storytelling. That storytelling can be in so many different ways. It could be internally through things like retrospectives, through inviting people to show and tells, by doing demos. Sometimes when we're doing business cases, we don't talk through the investment proposal. We showcase what we've built to the investment committee. It's by demoing, it's by bringing people to meet with teams and just feel the buzz, harder to do now. But within those environments, feel the sense of urgency and sense of difference. But But also, it doesn't harm to do lots and lots of external communications. In the last few weeks, Thames has been nominated for 11 major IT awards from a track record of precisely 0 for many years, partly because we'd never thought it was really that important. It is important, not because we want to have the reflected glory, but because it's about giving confidence and validation to the teams that they're doing the right thing, because many of them have taken brave steps to become product owners, for example. But it's also about creating belief in our shareholders and stakeholders that we're doing the right things. So the key is finding the opportunity to start, but maintaining confidence is all about the things I've talked about, but also really genuinely over-indexing on all of the comms, the PR, and learning the power of storytelling and using it fully in every way possible to create an enormous confidence. So there's this massive pull. Can you go faster? Can you do more? Can we give you more money to invest in your transformation, which is really unusual, but it can be done because that's how we scaled in HMRC. And that's how we're starting to scale out within Thames as well.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Mike. Next question comes from Pauline, who'd like to know, what practical steps do organizations need to take for business and technology to work closer together?
Well, the first thing is not thinking of business technology as being different. It's probably my enduring frustration that people still, I hear this phrase, the business. It's almost like we're prisoner to the past, and we hear it in our own teams, we hear it out in the organization, still hear it today. And I actively pick people up. It's not something I normally do, but I try to. It's the co-creation component, really. The recognition that when you start to build, you build with frontline users or customers in the room and helping you with research, they're helping you with design, maybe even helping you with testing the products. Guess what? Because firstly, they get products that work and meet their needs. Secondly, they do powerful advocacy to their colleagues or other customers around that. It's about that co-creation. You break down that barrier. You need the product owners and you need the users to do that, to co-create together. That way, there isn't this arbitrary divide between business and technology. There's just one team working to common purpose, bringing very different ways of working. But it does bring challenges. So in my experience, there's two groups of people who get disintermediated in this model. One is your service systems integrators. Don't feel bad about that. It's long overdue. And secondly, is actually often middle management, because those product teams that you're building and you're bringing in a frontline users, you've got middle managers for whom their status is driven by the hierarchy, the role that they have that often they've worked hard to achieve. They feel deeply uncomfortable at the idea of empowering frontline staff and users to come in and participate in shaping and designing the future of the business. You have to decide how you're going to deal with that frustration, how you're going to deal with the fact that they want to impose the decisions on those people, rather than empowering them to get on and actually direct this. And that's difficult. There are all kinds of ways that you can tackle that, one of which I passionately advocated in many forms in the past, which is simply abolish management as a concept.
That brings us nicely on to the next question, which was, as a CTO, is it safe for you personally to admit when you've made a mistake, or are the rules a little different at the top? This is from Simon.
If you're not humble enough to learn, then you're never going to grow, and you're never going to make a powerful impact. That's not about where you sit in the organisation. I kind of describe it as being 1980s leadership. There's been a transition, and I call them Thatcher's children. Right? Just because they grew up in a world where it was about heroic leadership, and you couldn't fail, and you had to control information because knowledge was power. And you see that in, people going forward for awards. At HMRC, when we put people forward, it was nearly always about teams, or it was about, apprentices or frontline staff in our teams. It was never about the heroic CIO kind of model. Whereas another government agency, I remember, won CIO of the year. And the members of the team said, we'd rather work in an organisation that put its teams forward than its heroic leader. So we have to break that heroic leadership model. How do we do that? By showing humility, by being open about mistakes, by being willing to learn and constantly grow, but also by cascading that as a mindset and through all of our people, partly by exemplifying it, partly by encouraging it, partly by not tolerating some of the other legacy behaviours that come with that traditional leadership model. I would be open about, I've taken on this role, I've never been a CTO before. Thames has taken some risk on me, despite what I may have talked about I've done previously. It's not a role I've ever done. One of the challenges for me was about personal growth and learning I would get, but you don't get that unless you're willing to accept there are things you don't know. You're humble enough to listen, and act on the grace, advice, and guidance that others get you, and that's everyone. And there are lots of ways you can demonstrate that. In my first 100 days, I was hugely focused on walking the floors, listening and understanding what really goes on. One of the things that came out was huge equity issues in our teams. People paid differently, treated differently. I made that my number one priority because it felt important. Because it was important, because people were telling me it was so. And I think if you've got that mindset of listening and acting and reflecting, it doesn't matter whether it's a mistake or a positive change that you need to make. I think it'll make a real difference to how people behave around you. And ultimately, that becomes the culture that you seek to create.
Great. That's a really great response, Mike. It reminds me of a blog post that Anna Shipman recently put out, who has a similar style of leadership, and particularly, how she made a goal to meet with everyone in her team, in fact, all of the engineers within her first year.
It's hugely important. And what's brilliant is we've got a new CEO, Sarah, who's come in, a new CEO. She's just spending months learning the business and getting to know people and hearing what people are saying. I think what a powerful message that is. She's doing lots and lots of direct one-to-one, one-to-many, one-to-few, one-to-many conversations with people, some directly, some with technology. And it's having an enormously positive effect because, somebody who's a role model like that, cascading that and just projecting those behaviors, it makes people like me and everyone else realize we're now in a safe space to practice those behaviors ourselves. So it really does make a difference, and that's really helping with the transformation that we're going through.
Absolutely. Okay, let's move on to our next question. So this is one received from before the talk. So from your experience, Mike, in the public sector, have you seen successful use of supplier playbooks in that context?
Yeah, we used the HMRC, I would say that, wouldn't I? Because originally the idea came about when you find out you're spending hundreds of millions with some suppliers simply on infrastructure, then you look at it and you go, how did we get here? But also but the contracts are up for renewal in 3 years. We need to fundamentally rethink our relationship with them. And that requires us to think long-term and act long-term. So it was driven by necessity. When you spend an enormous amount of money and you feel you're heavily constrained in terms of delivering change. Have I seen them used elsewhere? Yes, because when I was looking to build these originally at HMRC, I brought a small specialist consultancy in called Finex, and the reason for that was I connected through some people who knew them, who said, we've done something similar to this with other clients. So, and that's one of the things I would positively encourage. I got that from going out and talking to people in my network. I call it going walkabout. And to be honest, it's, forget spending millions of pounds with consultants on analysis and design. You can get a lot of this learning in a lot of these playbooks, whether it's supplier playbooks or, transformation playbooks, simply by, using events like this to take advantage of the peer network that's out there. Just spending a couple of weeks every quarter is what I seek to do. Out and about, talking to peers in the industry, listening to frontline teams, listening to customers. What you get from that is a powerful set of playbooks for how you can work. What I got in this case was go talk to these guys because they've done a lot of this work. And then in doing that, brought them in. Actually, the real challenge is you can't see the work that they've done with others because, as you saw on the label, it's top secret because the commercial value is huge. And it can't leak to our suppliers that we have this thing. We now know as a result of this. What they don't know is what's in it. So I couldn't see it, but the concept really appealed to me. It was clear that other major companies had seen huge value from doing it. It wasn't a lot of work either. It really wasn't a huge amount of work. It brought all of our knowledge and intelligence together and helped us to step back, reflect, and think differently. Now what we're looking to do is actually go and test our playbook with companies who are also facing similar challenges to go, can we start to maybe share and compare notes? And I did that with another major utility this week around one of our suppliers, around Salesforce, because we've brought into them, they're considering where they should. And we both came to the same view that we needed a long-term game plan. And what we did, we were able to learn from each other around how good our game plans were. And actually, we got some new tactics and some new levers from the conversation, both of us did. So I think, taking back control from where it lies to where it belongs is fundamental to this, to success in these kind of transformations. And that's what they help us do.
That's great to hear about your organisation looking to share some of their playbooks with other people. I think seeing playbooks done openly and out in the public domain is brilliant.
And I recommend, by the way, just Equal Experts have been publishing a series of playbooks as well. Absolutely fantastic. They come from the hard yards of having been built through really. I look at the Inception playbook. How many times did we actually do that within HMI? Hundreds. So it's a proven pathway. But what I love is the fact that you've open sourced it. You can't necessarily open source the content of a supplier paper. Mm-hmm. You're really open to the idea of sourcing the basic constructs, maybe with dummy data, because frankly, we all need to start learning how we're going to master these kind of relationships.
Yeah, even that kind of framework can be really helpful to other organisations.
I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, then another very topical question based on your previous responses from Barry Carter. So as a new CTO, what is one piece of advice? I guess Barry has just become a new CTO. So what advice do you have for Barry of the biggest lesson you have learned in terms of being a new CTO?
That's a great question, Barry. One piece of advice, I've given quite a lot in here. Do I have to choose one? It's small groups of committed people who change the world. So the first thing you have to do when you walk into the organisation is work out who this group of people are going to be your fellow travellers. Hopefully in that group of fellow travellers, you'll find one guiding spirit. You'll know this, Lindsay, at HMRC. I met Bridget, and she was just amazing. She knew how to guide me through the organisation, connect me to the people who could become the fellow travellers. And I think if you can find your spirit guide in the organisation, build a small community of people who get what you're trying to do and work with them, you can do incredible things. We did there, and I've done that in Thames as well. I'm grateful to Joe, to Wayne, to Gary, to Graham, to John, all the guys that we've worked together over the last few months to really start to do something really quite striking. But that would be my advice. It is small groups of committed people who change the world. Find your fellow travellers as soon as you can.
That's very practical advice. Thanks for that. That's great. Okay, next question is from Philip Stewart. Relates to the four big platforms or the four dragons that you showed at the beginning. I love that concept. He was wondering how stable are they, do you think? And do you see ServiceNow, for example, as coming in as a contender?
With Bill McDermott at the helm, no. Because I believe SAP are in deep trouble, personally. You've seen that with the announcements recently. They made commitments they failed to meet. They're struggling. They bought a lot of companies. They haven't integrated it easily. Their cloud offerings are less mature than it is. They don't necessarily have that kind of DNA, if you like, that the native companies have. So it could fall to 3 over time. They have a long install base, but who's winning share? Who's winning mind share? Things like that. You see Salesforce tearing it up. You see AWS tearing it up. You see Microsoft tearing it up. You see SAP struggling. I think with ServiceNow, I suspect they're small enough to be gobbled up with somebody else. Although I would buy shares in Esri if it was me, because they've got a dominant market position and a great product and almost kind of core to many businesses, but often not seen in quite the same way. So my sense is, like Salesforce did with Click, to fill out gaps in its offering. I suspect some of those are, almost second-tier players will get bought up and consumed by some of the bigger players. Although all those bigger players will find a way to replicate what they do well enough to take over and dominate instead. That's my view. Look, I'm likely to be completely wrong. I don't buy shares in technology companies for that reason, because it's not appropriate, but also because I'm almost certainly going to be, I'll either be lucky or wrong because it's a forecast. But, you've got to have some planning assumptions to base on. If our future is about those four dragons, inherently are going to be 80% of what we do, then, I suspect then what we need to do is plan for that. Those assumptions may well turn out to be wrong, but we've also built playbooks for the second tier of suppliers in anticipation that some of them might end up being first tier over time. And by the way, this is a constantly, with mergers and acquisitions, huge investment going up into some of these domains. There's so much iteration and change going on. Actually, you do need to be constantly reviewing and reflecting. But if you're going to write strategies that at least you need to anchor some of your thinking into the long term, you've got to make assumptions about what the future might look like, and that this is mine.
Okay, great, thank you. Now, it's a different tack is come from Richard Baines, a colleague from who we've known quite well. So Richard asks, or says, he very much agrees with your sentiments on the mindset, and he saw positive benefits when you were back in HMRC. Richard wonders, how much do you think, Mike, it's worth investing in trying to change the mindset of your senior IT peers, that they have regressive IT as a supplier cost center or heroic CIO mindset? How much do you think it's necessary to have your chief exec understand it and to let you lead like that? And then he goes on to say, sometimes it feels like there's a few people in IT who've had this epiphany that are all in the business. And it's a bit like being trapped inside an insane asylum.
Well, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
How do you peel that onion? I mean, in terms of the CEO, you've got a crisis, people just tend to cut through the traditional thinking. If you've got a leader like Sarah or like John Beaumont, who comes in, who's got a positive growth mindset around this kind of digital DNA, have the digital DNA, then that helps too. You really got to look, and part of this is about choosing your opportunity. It's also choosing your leadership. When I came into HMRC, I wanted to work with Mark Durnley, who, a really interesting guy, quite Marmite. I don't think Mark could mind me saying that, but he was absolutely determined to drive through this transformation and create the air cover for us so that we could be successful. There's no doubt he did that. But he also had a CEO in Lynn who stood back and said, no, I trust you, Mark. We need, we have a crisis. I trust that you can help us to solve it. So I think you also sometimes have to accept those conditions are not there. You try and choose them when you come to a new role. And I did choose my leadership as well as I chose a great company. But I also, anyone who looked at my LinkedIn profile will see I also only spent 4 months on Future Borders. There was a reason for that, because I travelled into it believing the conditions for success and growth were there, and it turned out they weren't. And I walked away early on because I couldn't make it work. And I think that's an okay thing to do. I really do. If you can't make it work or it doesn't turn out to be what you expect, it's okay to step away. Recognizing the current crisis, that may not be as straightforward, but you're all talented people. You're all amazing people. You've got choices. You've got options. If this option isn't the right one for you, then go and find one that will, because there are so many great businesses, and particularly great public services out there that would benefit from the skills that you would bring.
That's great advice. I think particularly like the bit about recognizing when is the right time to walk away from something and not being afraid to do so.
Got to.
Look at other options. So we have another question from Armatura. Where do you start with creating your journey blueprint? And do you start with getting an architect and mapping business processes?
It's a transformation journey, so there are times when you need to do that. What I found is sometimes you can just deliver value and you make a change and it takes you nowhere. But you've still delivered value, you built confidence, you built credibility, you built some capability. And then what you find is that you come to a point where you can't keep doing that without actually building a blueprint, knowing how to get from here to there. In my experience, if you start with a blueprint and say, look, there's going to be a journey that will take 2 or 3 years to get here, you terrify nearly everybody. And it rarely happens. I learned that lesson at HMRC, where I advocated after one of my walkabouts a modern omni-channel business that we could become. And everyone said, that's great, but it'll never happen here. So instead, we chose to build it iteratively, step by step, and we succeeded. And then everyone went, isn't it amazing? We built this amazing blueprint. And so the advice I would give is I characterize people in 2 types. I learned this from Procter & Gamble many years ago when I worked with them at Boots. They characterize people as 2 types, today forward and future back. You build a blueprint, you terrify today forward people because they're thinking about the next quarter, the 2% improvement they need to achieve. You scare them through the scale of change. I've learned that many times over. If you're working with today forward people, you have to sell them the first release. We're going to deliver a bucket of value, 90 days, going to be heroic, going to be amazing. It'll solve that crisis. Fantastic. How good was that? That was great, wasn't it? Do you want us to do that again? Yeah, great, crack on. So you play to that mindset. Eventually, when you go, now we need a blueprint, if you're 3 or 4 stages along, you go, now we need a blueprint, they're much more open to the idea because they've got belief in you. If you're working with people who are future back and they go, yeah, I need a picture, I need sunny uplands, the challenge there is often people who are future back, they don't know how to architect a way to get there. They'll then turn around to you and go, that's great. What are the stepping stones to get there? As I've talked about in the session earlier, some of those pathways or stepping stones, they're well set. Many people have traveled them. And if you don't know what they are, get out and talk to your peer group. You'll very quickly pick them up. You'll have the confidence to start. But if they're not, very occasionally, I'm going to argue a lot of what we're doing around data and the way we want to transform asset, the way we invest in our assets long-term in terms of, I talk to a lot of people in the industry. There is no playbook for this. There is no proven pathway. So we're going back to our core belief, which is let's just start and find the value, deliver it, and see where it takes us. It may be a dead end, but it's still great to build success. Or it may unlock the next stepping stone and the next stepping stone. And then at some point, it will become clear we either have or we need a blueprint, and we'll work on it. And a blueprint of the type you described. And that's where I would advocate tackling this.
Great. That's a great answer. I remember particularly at HMRC seeing that the significant impact on people when they saw something delivered within 2 to 3 months, and just the momentum it helped build. It was a really great way of clearing the path.
I'm a man of many cliches, but somebody once said to me, there are only two motivators, hope and fear. Yeah. Know which one I prefer. The crisis may be the thing that gets you started, but hope is belief is the thing.
Yeah, hope's what keeps you going.
Yeah.
Okay, then next question from Richard Baines. So do you have any books or other forms of reading you'd recommend on making a transition from a director type role to that of CIO, CTO?
Can I be honest and say I don't read a lot because it's not how I learn. I learn by doing things. And when I'm not sure, I learn by going talking to people, thought leaders. So we're all different. That's just my personal learning style. Means I need to go and interact and have whiteboards and think out loud and do all those kind of things. That's how I tend to learn. When I do want to study stuff that I need to kind of lean back, I tend to use podcasts, variety of different ones. Recently, a lot more about politics than about technology. But everyone has a different learning style. The thing I advocate is taking the time. I find it really, really difficult, almost impossible on any given day to think, I'll have a morning on reflection and an afternoon on delivery or review or whatever. I need to take blocks of time and protect it, get into a reflective and learning mode, more listening mode rather than transmit. And in doing that, I then choose the styles that work for me. If I do read to get learnings around change, I tend to read history books. When I talk about a small group of committed people changing the world, I got that from a book about Russian history and how 200 communists took over a country of 200 million people. They did it through comms and PR and getting this sense of omnipotence because they could do that through the broadcast media that they were using, or various comms media that they were using. So if I need to learn change lessons, I typically use history books to learn them. Just a personal preference.
Oh, great. Excellent. Okay, then next question from Pauline is about any tips for managing change fatigue along the transformation journey? Because they're long journeys, I know from bitter experience.
Yeah, change fatigue, also resilience. Something you can be tired, but also this stuff is hard, right? And another kind of open reflection with you is sometimes people, when they project these heroic leadership models, there's a lot of pretense. People in leadership positions don't find this stuff any less challenging, stressful, emotionally difficult. I lose sleep over this stuff. I worry and fret about the impact on people, and are we doing the right things all the time, right? So fatigue and that sense of always kind of uncertainty and the need for personal resilience is actually really difficult. The challenge around this is, well, firstly, there's an awful lot about the model I've described where that constant celebration of success, having all those announcements, the first user, the 10th user, the 100th user, look what customers are saying, isn't it amazing? Right, let's do the next thing. That urgency, that positivity, and with it the culture of continuous recognition of teams and individuals is incredibly good for maintaining resilience and energy through even long periods of time. Actually, how do you handle the bumps that inevitably come? That's a very personal thing. The way I handle it is actually I find energy from being with other people. So I go walkabout. I talked about it. I spend time with customers and listen to what they're saying. I spend time with people in our teams and hear the great work they're doing. Go and sit in one of your Scrum teams and participate and experience what they're doing and just see the energy, the vitality, the ideas, the innovation that's going on in those teams, those delivery teams. Go and talk to users who've benefited from the stuff that you've built. I find energy from interacting with others. And that's how I then refine the purpose to keep going and keep moving forward. It's often easy to look at how far you've got to travel, blimey. But if you look back at how far you've come, and feel a sense of purpose that you've created, it reinvigorates you for what are often challenging times ahead.
Great. Thanks for that answer. Then we'll move on to a question from Karina on any tips on how to design change management strategy.
Try and minimize the amount of change you actually have to do. The great thing about the agile model and releasing daily, hundreds of times a day, is the change burden is much, much lower. Second thing is if you design with real live users in the room, the adoption curve. I've seen change adoption that hasn't been the classical change curve. It's literally been from here to here. Because it's been, within that agile model, you can rapidly respond. I mean, when we rolled out the contact platform HMRC, we were rolling out to about 1,000 users a week. But we weren't just training them. We were listening to what the feedback they were giving. And every night we made incremental changes. And then we released it into live the next day. Because we could in this model. And, people are going, blimey, you said and then you did. And that's a very different change experience for people. And we surveyed our users, our frontline users at the end of that, got 94% CSAT on the program. I've never had it before or since. Because it turns out engaging, listening, involving them, creating for them, and then listening and then going again is a powerful way to minimize change adoption, and with it, the fatigue that can come with that. Now, look, I recognize not all change fits into this category. Sometimes you've got to do the more classical change. We have a program that's going to end up transforming our field force management, but we may end up having fewer people working in that environment when we do. That's about actually treating, people with integrity and dignity, recognizing the personal impacts on them, not just seeing them as numbers on a spreadsheet. I remember doing a very big organizational change early in my time at ICI, 500 people leaving the business. I honestly think that only one of those people left with real resentment from that, because we tried to handle everybody as an individual, treat them with the utmost respect and dignity through what was a difficult process, and help them identify exciting new possibilities for their own futures. So, there's an element of remembering there are humans at the center of all of this, whether it's in the good design or the impact that change has. You make this all human-centered in the way that you behave. It's not always easy. You can reflect back and feel pride in the way that you handled it.
Great. Okay, thanks. That's that answer. So we'll now move on to a question from Philip Stewart about any tips for agile and collaborative working during COVID. So you started pre-COVID, pre-lockdown.
Yeah.
How have you adapted?
Well, we are doing what many companies are doing. We've scaled up our product teams, working remotely. I think a couple of things. One is, it turns out that half-decent technology really helps. Having collaboration tools like Miro and Teams and others has really made a difference, because it's been easy to collaborate from multiple locations. What we've also tried to encourage those teams to do is to go through the kind of inception events that are in the playbook, because you can still do them remotely in the COVID world. An inception event isn't just about, are we all clear what we're going to do and deliver and on what role? It's actually about creating that sense of common purpose. So we've not lost sight of the fact that we incept for a reason, not that we just have clear goals and priorities, but actually we have an aligned team who have really great working practice, have an agreed set of behaviors, and they have the what I call cultural guardrails embedded in those teams. And it's a concept I've used a lot with teams and organizations. There are things in your organization that drive the wrong behaviors. So, for example, having personal incentives over team-based incentives can drive the wrong behaviors. Cultural guardrails are about the things that positively reinforce the desired behavior until it becomes the culture. And one of the things I love about Agile is it is full of ceremonies. Those ceremonies exist to act as positive cultural guardrails. So a simple example being, I used to love walking around the floors in Newcastle, and we'd see teams doing stand-ups and each throwing the ball to each other. it's a symbol, but that symbol was about, we listen and respectfully engage with the whole group. We don't talk over each other. It's not the highest paid person's opinion. Everybody's equal in that environment. Those are powerful ceremonies, but they're cultural guardrails. And what we've sought to do in the kind of incepting these teams is actually establish those right at the very beginning, the way that we would if we were working in the same location. It's not as easy to do, but it turns out actually if you start in the right way, you can proceed in the right way as well.
Yeah, that could really echo, that need for helping teams form good habits and seeding new teams with people that understand kind of what those habits look like.
Yeah.
And we'll take just one final question now about how do you navigate through office politics to get things done? We never saw any politics at HMRC, so you probably can't use that as an example.
I could talk a lot about Cabinet Office and Brexit. 9 months of my life I'm never going to get back again. How do you navigate the politics? At the end of the day, nearly every human being wants to be associated with something that's successful. What you've got to do is create a success that everybody feels a stake in. The great thing about the way we deliver in kind of this agile world is it's not about us, it's about the team and the users and everything else. It's about making everyone feel they're part of that. So, if there are people who feel, there's something going on in their area, that you're building some great product, you're releasing regularly, there's real buzz and excitement about it. How do you get them to feel a sense that they've helped create? They've shown that. And there are all kinds of tactics in the playbook for doing that, including nominating them for awards and recognition and all kinds of stuff, inviting them along and giving them kudos. There's all kinds of ways. So, thousands of tactics, but one core principle is you have to create this guiding coalition of leadership that wants to get behind it. You have to have that critical mass at the most senior leadership levels. I've talked a lot about how you create confidence through powerful storytelling. The key to that is you've also got the sense that everyone feels that they can associate themselves with that success. Because if they do, they're going to want to do more of it, and that will break a lot of the barriers to resistance down. And I'll finish with my final cliche. People talk a lot about success having many mothers and fathers. It does. Actually, actively encouraging that is a great way to break through those politics.
Great. That's a really great piece of advice to end on. A huge thank you, Mike, for your presentation and sharing us your thoughts. It's been a really fascinating and enjoyable session. And thanks to everyone that's come along and listened and asked questions. We'll be continuing our Client Spotlight series. So if you look out on our website, we'll be posting details soon of our next session. And so on that note, we'll end the session tonight. So thank you very much, folks.